So good afternoon, or wherever you are. I guess it's probably afternoon, no matter where you are. Good afternoon, everyone. This is truly a pleasure. I'm Rabbi Dan Moskowitz from Temple Shalom in Vancouver. David, I just sent you a text message. I just chatted to you in the Zoom. I know you and I are meeting later, so I just want to make sure you're in the right place. You're here for the Danny Siegel learning also? You're muted, but I'll take that as a
yes. I am. Thank you.
Okay. I just want to make sure.
You having sent me your beautiful site, I saw something I was interested in, so I thought I would hook in.
Wonderful. I'm glad that you are. We're glad that you're here. So Danny and I were actually talking. We got online together about a half an hour before this to catch up. And we need more time than that to catch up. I have known Danny Siegel since I was, 16 years old. And a camper in BBYO at BBYO's Kala ILTC in Starlight, Pennsylvania, where he came to and tell his stories and introduce us to his many, many Mitzvah Heroes in only the way that Danny Siegel can do. And I have been a student and a fan since that time, which is now going on 35 years. Frightening. And when I was in Los Angeles, Danny came and spoke at my congregation there at Temple Judea and stayed at my home. I had a condo at the time with a guest bedroom. And I remember, Danny, at 4 o'clock in the morning, for some reason you were up and you said, "Moskowitz, we're going for a walk." And I didn't know that people went for walks in Los Angeles, let alone at 4 in the morning. And but every opportunity that I have when I'm in Israel or we're in the same town, to sit with Danny and to learn and to really to sit at his feet and drink in his Torah is an opportunity that I feel blessed with. And so we are very fortunate today to have Danny Siegel with us. Danny's going to share with us his newest book. I would say it's the new old, right? The old shall be new and the new shall be made holy. Radiance. It's a collection, an anthology, I would say, of Danny's greatest hits. 50 years of writing. Yeah, hold up your books. He'll virtually sign.
But it comes out backwards. This is the Hebrew edition. Anne's got it the right way. Thank you.
Right. 50 years of Danny's poetry and his text and his teaching and his stories. So really, thank you all for joining us today. Danny, thank you for being here. I know many of the people on the screen have a connection to you like mine that goes way back. And you really are, for many of us, sort of you are the mitzvah soundtrack of our lives, the tzedakah soundtrack, and the reference point. I still have, you gave us these out in BBYO in 1986 or 87, these little cards that I was supposed to put on a car that had parked in a handicapped or disabled parking space. That said something to the effect of you shouldn't do that. And somebody else had to, I'm disabled and somebody else has to walk because you parked here. I don't remember exactly what it said, but it's in a file.
Yeah. Wow.
Those were powerful things. So Danny, how did you first get involved in your mitzvah work? What started you doing this? What prompted you to do it? And what do you see or not as you look out at the Jewish landscape today?
First of all, I got to say thank you, Rabbi, for having me. Don't trust me, those of you who are from Temple Shalom, but I think you have a great rabbi. I only know about 500 of them. I know that even though, I've been to your synagogue a couple of times and I've been to Beth Israel a couple of times, but if I were to move to Vancouver, I would join Temple Shalom without a doubt. With my 40-some years on the road, I'd say maybe there are half a dozen places that I would feel comfortable being a member. It's also the synagogue itself. Anne, whom I consider to be one of the fine educators around, had me in for at least once or twice. And it's astonishing, aside from what you say, Rabbi, about what you had as far as Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur on Zoom, 12,000 people, about, and you said what, 8% were eating a sandwich at the time, right?
I didn't say any of these things, but yes, go ahead. Dave.
Okay. How did I get involved? I didn't plan to. Just like with Anne holding up the book, I didn't plan to write. A few people, I think Rabbi Hofberg probably knows, I entered Columbia as a math major. That's because I always used to get straight A's in math. 2 semesters of calculus proved me wrong. And by chance, I had a Gemara Chavrusa, and one of the 3 people said, you really ought to take Professor so-and-so's course in 20th century drama. And I became a complete major. So I got interested in literature, and I started reading great literature, but that didn't mean I was going to write. Same thing, it's very simple. And Rabbi Kaufman knows this, and Clayman knows this for sure, and Rabbi Steele knows it. I took seriously the thing that the Talmud says, that if you're going on a journey, people should give you $1 or $2 because it is protection. In fact, it's only supposed to be $1. People give you $2 just to be safe on the way back. But the Talmud says $1 is good enough for you on both ways. So I had been to Israel 59, 61, 63, 64, 67, maybe 7 or 8 times. And I don't know why. There was no crisis going on in Israel, which was unusual. But in January of 75, I said, I really ought to go to Israel. And I went for a month, and instead of waiting for people to give me the money, I started asking. And those of you all the way, like Marcy, who knows my stuff backwards and forwards, the first tzedakah report I issued had $955. And what do you do with $955 in your pocket for tzedakah? Well, one would think you would look for organizations or institutions to do it. All this stuff, by the way, we owe to my late mother, and that means mum, my mum, who said, when you get there, you must meet. She gave me one name, and many of you know it because you've been there. Miriam Mendelow, the founder of what? Marcy, what? Lifeline for the
Lifeline for the old.
Yad L'Kashish.
Yad L'Kashish. Right.
And for some of you who have been around and met my Mitzvah Heroes, Rabbi Hofberg has spent many summers with me and made the rounds, and Anne spent a summer with me. Your first encounter knocks your socks off. First of all, first thing you notice about Mary Mendelow, she was short. When we would bring the US migrants, we brought thousands. She would stand on a bench and the kids would sit in the courtyard on the ground. And she would go like this is the way you treat old people, not like whatever. And when you find out, and I'm going to be writing about this, my friend Rabbi Joel Soffin is writing a book. It's about, she said, I have to do something. There were elderly people begging in the streets. Now, many of you yourselves have done the same. And many of us are feeling that, and we are watching a I don't even know what the word means, an abundance of people doing things they didn't know they were going to do before. Delivering packages of food, calling people that they hadn't spoke to in years. Discovering that she was a teacher. She lived in Tzfat. She was a very successful teacher for years. but she said, I've got to stop this. I assume she also thought that it was a disgrace to Jerusalem. And she took them off the streets and founded her first workshop, which was a book bindery for school children. Smart move, so that young people and old people will be connected. And when they go to school with their school books rebound. In fact, I can look over here. This is, I think they rebound my Tanakh years ago. Every time they look at their school book, they'll think of the old person. And from there, it grew to the second, the third, the fourth, and so forth. I can't remember what she needed money for at that time. I'd have to look at the first report. But then I started asking people who's doing good stuff. And it soon became clear to me that you had to find out a little bit more. Who's doing good stuff efficiently, absolutely reliably, and with no waste of money. And once I started doing that, they were everywhere. In fact, for your congregants, Rabbi, you might want to teach that the Gemara says people have to talk about their tzedakah work. Because in your congregation, you have plenty of these people. And some people don't know to go find them and hang out with them and work with them. If I look around among the people that are here, I can give you already 6, 7 people who are mitzvah people that I would want to hang out with and learn from. So I'm on the first round, I met the Rabbanit Kapach, whom I knew for 35 years or so until she passed away. She used to give me her home-baked pita when I'd go by Friday morning, and chilbe, which is a developed taste. My mother had also mentioned a woman named Mrs. Michaelis Stern. Some mitzvah heroes have to work in tandem. The former chief Sephardi rabbi of the British Empire was a man named Moses Gaster. He had like 8 or 9 kids. One of them became Theodore Gaster, who taught at Barnard for years. His daughter was one of the real pioneers working with kids with mental limitations. But she was all over the place. And Mrs. Gaster, who was, for lack of a better term, a Yeki, she was born in Germany. She could put it together so she could make things happen. So I had Mendelo, I already had the Rabbanit. I was told about Yaakov Maimon, who invented Hebrew shorthand, was the secretary to the Knesset. And he used to run around in the early days of the state when all these immigrants were coming in and pulled people off of the street. And he'd say, in that apartment over there, they need somebody to teach them Hebrew, or their kids need tutors in math. I was with him one day when we did it. And I remember we sat down, he was an old man by then. We stopped at an army base for lunch. And all these soldiers looking around and said, who's this guy? And one guy says to the other, shh, that's Yaakov Maimon. And that's the reaction generally when you talk about Mitzvah Heroes. People are awed by it, or you'll hear in the audience, they say, wow. And I have met how many over the years? More than 100. And I don't mean to be snooty about it, but it strikes me that it's worthwhile finding them, even though it puts pressure on you that you can always do more. Now, I have to give you the flip side of it, John. I hate to do this. I once met a kid, must have been 19 or 20, and I still can't remember it. He'd either finished 3 years at the University of Pennsylvania or had graduated. And I asked him a simple question. Can you name me one professor that you looked at and you said, That's the kind of person I would like to be. And there's no answer. Now, if I were to ask all those people that have been with me running around, how would you like to be, to a certain extent, Avshalom Benny with the animal-assisted therapy, or like a Yaakov Maimon, or an Anita Shkady, the one who founded therapeutic horseback riding in Israel, or a Miriam Mendelow. And it was not hard to find them. How many people, I mean, not many of them are of the uniqueness of the late Hadassah Levy, who died only, Ron, probably in the last year, I think. Rabbi Hofberg actually drove me to see her. She was 87 at the time. She's the one who, when she was in a hospital for a stretch of time, when she got better, she got up, roamed around the hospital, and saw all these babies with there. There we go. There's a picture of Hadassah that's being held up by Ellen Stewart. Thank you. Babies with Down syndrome who have been left behind. And at a certain point, she said, well, I'm going to do something about it. And she said with her driver, Yitzchak, in a week and a half, and she described how they worked in a cab. They made the rounds of hospitals, took in over 40 of the kids in a week and a half. The youngest one, a couple of months old. And she raised them. They're now in their 30s. Some probably in their late 30s. She had originally had a day care, a day activity type of thing for kids with Down syndrome. But then she took them and she raised them. All of them now live in not group apartments, but there are 3, 4 of them in an apartment. I think there might be supervision, all employed. And anytime I walk down the street and I see somebody with Down syndrome, I say, maybe he or she is one of Hadassah's kids. Who could we possibly know like her? And I can't remember who told me about Hadassah. She was no slouch. Her family, she has a picture. She's one of the mountain Jews from Dagestan. Got a picture of 2 guys with big beards who were Herzl's bodyguards. And her brother was the late Assistant Chief of Staff of the Israeli Army, Yekutiel Adam, who was killed in Lebanon at a certain point. And her nephew, Kuti's son, was the one who ran the northern border during the Galilee War, which got screwed up because, not because of the military, but because of the politics that were involved. She came from a nice chevra. But to make the jump and to say, I'm going to bring in these babies. And in the early days of USY, Rabbi Hofberg can tell you, when Rabbi Hofberg would bring congregational groups, or when he was a USY group leader, sometimes with the congregational groups, when they got off the plane, before they got to Jerusalem, to the hotel, the first stop was to see and play with the babies of Hadassah's.
Danny, I want to ask you. I want to follow up a little bit on that.
Yeah, please.
Because you've blended 2 of my questions together, and I didn't even ask the second one, which was to give us a few vignettes of some of the mitzvah heroes that you've met across the spectrum. But there was another part of that first question that I'm not sure we got into, which is, what do you see in the mitzvah hero landscape today? I mean, what's it looking like in terms of that kind of work in Israel today, in your world?
It's interesting with all of the problems that all of us are feeling relating to the pandemic. By the way, I just saw a scientific article that describes the biochemistry of it, and they referred to it as cooties. I bet you didn't know that. That's the scientific look. Checking all the journals. The fact is, day in, day out, anytime you want to look on the web, you will find people who didn't know that they were capable of stepping up and doing things. Some of them on a small, some of them don't have any plans to make it universal or huge. But I'll give you one example that came up recently. I don't know how I bumped into it. It's called Zoomers for Boomers. It's either high school or college kids, a network which is spread to over 20 cities where they are delivering food packages to people who can't get to the store. Now, I don't know who started it. I know, I mean, from years ago, there's a woman in her 30s now. She has 2 or 3 kids. Her bat mitzvah project is she wanted to throw a party for inner city kids. I think there were 30 or so at the first one. She just had the 25th anniversary of it with hundreds of kids and volunteers, training program and so forth. I don't think she planned it that way. But there are those, let's say they live in an apartment building and they look around and they see some of the elderly people. And now people are saying, is there anything I can do for you? Now, if that grows into something bigger, fine. If it doesn't, now some have emerged as Mitzvah Heroes. Not just because of how many thousands of people they reach, but because they get it. That this is what they're supposed to be doing. I remember a story of a Microsoft, one of these millionaires, one of these guys who was a geek, who like at age 12 could break into the Pentagon computer system. And after he had made his millions or something, he went on a trip to Nepal. And that's where it stopped. That's where he knew he had to set up educational opportunities and so forth for the Nepalese. The same thing with Sir Edmund Hillary. After he conquered Everest, he did educational and health things and built 2 airports, runways that were in inaccessible areas so that people could get more relief. Now, nothing against looking at somebody and saying, wow, he did Mount Everest, but he followed it up with Mitzvah Heroes. I invented the term Mitzvah Hero. None of my people accept the term hero. They're just doing what they're supposed to do. You see it on TV with the cops. The cop or the fire person pulls somebody out of the burning building and the woman says, you saved my life. And they say, I'm just doing my job. And that's what the Mitzvah Heroes think they're doing. If they bump into it and they say, aha, if I do it now, a package from home. Barbara Silverman going through a checkpoint. And I can remember she said there was a Gingy, a red-headed soldier, sweating. And he stuck away from home and so forth like that. She says, we really ought to send him a package. And the next thing you know, in a few years, she's sending out more than 100 to the soldiers. And we used to get US Wires, it was an assembly line, throwing in packages, a little too much junk food, but throwing in nasharai and extra toothbrushes and shampoo and whatever. And that was called a package from home, which is an adjunct to all the people that decided to start the thing for lone soldiers. I have friends who are lone soldiers. I know what it is. I live alone at the moment. And I have my former roommate from the joint program. We've set up once a week. We get together outside for an hour. But that's my main contact besides 7-Eleven. And sometimes Trader Joe's, depending on what time of day.
So Danny,
How-
go ahead. Sorry.
and how long the line is for the old people within the special hours. But I see people discovering in themselves that not only they have the power to do this, but they didn't realize it was there, and that they not only enjoy it so much, they see how much of an effect. Rabbi, this will take only 2 seconds. You know, all of you who follow my stuff, you know, no such thing as a small mitzvah. The minute they see something they've done that cost them $2 or took them 10 minutes out of their way, and they see the effect on another person, you get hooked. I had only been in the hospital when I was a little kid, and then about 60 years later, I had to go again. And I was in screaming pain. Called my friends, they came over. They drove me to the hospital, they took care of me. I'm recovering for 2-3 days. The husband calls me and he says, look, I have some leftover sweet and sour meatballs. It was, as the Talmud says, Tam Gan Eden. It was heaven. I know how many of you out there, if we could, would feed me Thanksgiving dinner. Well, there are people somehow doing it for people out there, some of them who had never done it before. And I think rabbis are seeing it all over the place because of the extended reach that there are people that are coming to Torah classes that never used to, and people that are coming to shul that never used to. Best thing about that is if you don't put your picture up, you can go make a sandwich, you can go to the John, you can do all these things, and they'll never know you're not there. Okay. Yeah.
So, Danny, I mean, what I take from what you've said, and thank you, is that sometimes the people lead you to the text. Sometimes it's the people that you see that then bring us back to, oh, this is a Jewish value. This is anchored in our tradition. And sometimes the text leads you to the people.
Yes, exactly.
Sometimes we study and we see, oh, this is what we should be doing. This is this is our shlichut. This is our sacred purpose. And you brought 2 texts today that you wanted to share with us about that. And this is my segue to give you the opportunity to teach a little text to us. So
Okay.
I'll put them up on screen for everyone.
That would be good.
Hopefully you can all see that.
That's the one I want to do, yes. The second one, not so important, but I'm a Rabbi Tarfon. I don't know, the discussion that they were having, Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Akiva, I don't remember, it was probably some technical Talmudic stuff, which I don't know. At one point, Rabbi Tarfon, who was older than Rabbi Akiva, but already people realized that Rabbi Akiva was the man. He says, Kol ha-poresh mimcha ka-poresh min hachayim. Poresh means to separate. We all feel that now. No matter how great Zoom is to bring together Marcy and Ann and Rabbi Hofberg, and I see Bill is on, it's still artificial. And Rabbi Tarfon says to his younger colleague, if I'm away from you, I don't have a sense of what life is all about. And I think when I hang out with the Mitzvah Heroes, there doesn't seem to be any question. You know, every summer for 44 years, I would take US Wires to meet Mitzvah Heroes. And so I would get treated every summer to get to see these people. Besides, we'd have an annual Mitzvah Heroes dinner. You look at them and you're exhausted afterwards because you say, You know what life isn't about, and I know what it is. But you see, and sometimes in the transmission, for all of you who have studied text, sometimes there's a slight change in different parts of the Talmud. So the top one is from Masachet Kiddushin, the second one is from Zvachim, and look at the difference. Amar lo, Rabbi Tarfon says to Rabbi Akiva, Kol haporesh mimcha keforesh mechayav. Who separates himself from you, who's too far from you, loses a sense of what a person's own life is about. Not the abstract, what life in general is about, but what your own life is about. And I find these to be extremely powerful. I'm not going to be arrogant and make this a universal thing, but it strikes me that my US wires get it. I don't think the college kids get it, at least the ones that grew up in yuppie Jewish homes, where the important thing was to get a 5-page resume when you're applying for college. I've gotten high school resumes that are longer than mine, and always to get A's. And they erroneously get the message that being the best is what your life is all about. In fact, I can't remember who pointed to me. Excellence, there is no Talmudic term for excellence. Aristeia, the Greek term, is often applied to the person who wins in one of their Olympic type games. It's whatever a football coach said, the only thing is winning. It's the only thing. That's not what we're saying here. By being in association with people like Akiva, and I don't think Rabbi Tarfon is only talking about his intellectual acumen. I think he was talking about Akiva as a person. After all, think of his life. There he was, a grungy, smelly shepherd. And along comes the boss's daughter, Rachel, sees that he is tzniah uma'aleh, which means he is modest, not as we use modest, and ma'aleh, which means he's got an edel neshama. He's really, there's something deeply profound about this person as a person. And that's what Rabbi Tarfon is reacting to. You're one of the greats, not because you are a genius with text, but it's what you do with text. I have to tell one other story. I realize Anne is a dog person. She knows I'm a cat person. Professor Daniel Sperber tells a great story about cats. Everybody knows the stories about why the rabbi came late or didn't make it to Kol Nidre. You know, there's the old widow, she's shivering at home and so forth. But there's another one. After the show gets out and somebody says he had seen Rabbi Israel Salanter running after a cat. And that's why he missed Shul. And so I said, what's this all about? He says, well, I have some borrowed books in my house. And I was afraid that maybe, which was a problem for them, some mice would get in and damage the books. So I had to get a cat into the house. I frankly think the cat was probably skinny and he was worried that it hadn't eaten dinner. But it's the same one with, well, Salanter is invited to eat at somebody's house. And before the meal, they're going to go wash their hands. And the lay person, watching to see how the holy man does it, expects him to use the maximum amount of water. Instead, he uses the minimum. And he asks, what's this all about? He says, when I see how hard it is for the servant to schlep the bucket of water from the stream to bring it there, why should I make my life harder on her? And we see that now, by the way. We see that in the time of the virus. People that are paying greater attention to those people who are working hard. I thank the people in the grocery stores. I thank my mail delivery person. I thank the people at the post office. I thank the maintenance people. Some of them have to work in, let's say, in the grocery store, because if they can't, they don't have any income at all. When the virus hit, the first economically disadvantage I thought of were those people at the ballpark. I grew up going to baseball games, who go up and down the steps selling beer and peanuts. And then you cancel the season, they got no income. They got no backup money, nothing. And they're just nobodies. But people are paying attention and making them not nobodies. So when you ask about the future, I don't think it's somebody say, is it going to last? I couldn't tell you. But I do think there are a certain number of people that once having discovered it and feeling good about how good they feel and how much they believe that they are better people than they might have thought they were, then I think it will stick for a certain extent. So I hope that answers to, yes. I didn't mention, can I do one more Mitzvah Hero real quick?
Of course.
John Belzer, there's an example. Belzer was a failed rock musician. He was actually in a duo with a woman, and he thought they were going to get a record contract, and said they hired her and left him out in the cold. Somewhere along the way, he thought about using his music to write songs for kids with life-threatening diseases, which became, of course, Songs of Love. It's now more than 30,000 songs. That's when I heard from him a little while ago. He has songwriters all over the place. I have sung on, what they do is they come in and they bring the song, and they have it recorded, everything except the chorus, and everybody in the audience becomes the chorus. And I've been a chorus in a half a dozen of these, maybe 7 of them. But I had never been in an audience where the child with the life-threatening disease was there in the audience. Well, when I was out on the West Coast, my friend Merrill Alpert, one of the great educators and youth workers in the country, brought me out to do a leadership weekend. She surprised me by flying John out. So naturally, we're going to have to sing. Sitting in the row in front of me was one of the chapter advisors. It was their child, holding a kid who maybe is 3 or 4 with a cap on her head. That's who we were singing for. That was spooky. And I asked Merrill, she said, Zoe is now 11 years old and in remission. Most of the kids don't make it. In fact, John tells a story about somebody that calls and says, John, I wore out the tape. Can you replace it? Okay, Rabbi, next.
I'll bring it up for you, Danny.
I'm not going to do the other text. This one's,
Okay.
that was enough total for today.
How about the poem?
Go to the next one.
Okay.
Okay.
You picked my favorite,
Who said that?
Marcy.
Oh,
I reminded Danny when we were going over these that we do have Canadians on here, so we've got to, it's an Americana kind of poem, but there's universal to it as well.
it wouldn't have worked if we said we North American kids. The rhythm would go it. Marcy, it was included in the book because my friend Merle Gould, the late Alan Gould's widow, who is by far the best critic of my prose and poetry, said she loved the poem. So I looked at it again. I said, what the heck? I got to turn a little bit of light on here. Thank you for telling me that, Marcy. Okay, if you have the book, I know Marcy has 5 of them. Everybody take the hint. Hanukkah is coming. All red, white, and blue, we American kids. All red, white, and blue, we American kids fell for it. Dr. Kildare, Ben Casey, Dr. Handsome this, surgeon that. 8 minutes each television hour, sweating behind a mask and saving them all on the table. Life and death were in their hands, and only in their hands. Here a snip, there retract, patches and pumps in the innards, and all kinds of miracles happened right before our eyes. America's saviors all, the cardio, neuro, ortho surgeons. It cut us, the common folk, out of miracles. But tzedakah saves from death. I don't mean to interrupt, but it's a good poem. I don't say it about all my stuff, but ooh. And then came along came tzedakah on a snorting white steed, rearing high on its legs. All of a sudden, people, this sounds just like what I was saying about in the time of the virus. All of a sudden, people bought food, wrote checks, sat at hotlines, and shopped for the shut-ins. They drove the lonely to synagogue. They took in children wandering the streets. They counseled and pushed and made shiny, wrapped packages called Dignity and Hope and delivered them to the old age homes, complete with a choir of youth group kids, every age unafraid of wrinkles and bends. Tzedakah saves from despair and death. The kids brought their pets to the sick and sick at heart to be petted and played with, smiled at, cooed over. And you would be hard pressed, you would, to tell just who exactly was saved from death. The pet or the petee, or the kid with the puppy who missed a little homework because he was too busy at the home for the elderly, which is located in all neighborhoods, in every town in America. Day, night, now, sleet, rain, and sometimes shooing away death with a gentle bark and a purr and touch. Tzedakah saves. Whole troops of them. The infinite team of salvation makers and life restorers. The teacher, the real estate broker, his daughter, the toy maker, towel dealer, and mechanic, the academic by day and spoon feeder by night. Regiments of the fat and short and average, Cary Grant bodies and nerd faces, PhDs and 12-year-olds, saving tzedakah from death. Yes, indeed, There's a battalion, an army or two out there in jeans and sweatshirts, slacks, blouses, loafers, scarves, and gloves. Just your run-of-the-mill normal people, squeezing into the great crowded group photograph in the sky. The tzedakah photograph. Wow.
Danny, when did you write that?
I don't know which book that's in, but I'll tell you in a second.
The reason I ask is that it's probably old enough that you might actually have antedated therapy animals, which are so common in so many good hospitals these days.
Yeah, I see it came out in my book, The Garden, which goes all the way back to 1985. If I knew anything about animals, yes, The Garden. Guys, anytime you're lacking something of Danny Siegel's, just call Ellen and Stewart. The only thing I knew about animals was how much I enjoyed our cats, and sometimes in the old days we had dogs. But certainly not until I met Avshalom Benny. In fact, Billy Beagle is on. He's the BB. Billy has played quite a time in Avshalom's work with, he has about 20, 25 cats and dogs for the therapy. Billy purchased the Great Dane for Avshalom. And now this other one, this small one with the big ears, the fluffy one, I can't remember what kind it is. It's called a something or other. I don't know what kind it is, but that was far beyond anything I thought. And most people think animal-assisted therapy is only, and I'm not complaining about it, bringing dogs into hospitals and nursing homes and so forth. By the way, let's talk about the creativity and the extent of people. Of the 10 to 15,000 US wires I worked with over the last 44 years, it's a disagreement as to how many there were. I always talk to the kids about mitzvah projects that we're doing, either as their bar bat mitzvah projects. Some of you are old enough to remember Soviet Jewry bracelets. Clayman, I'm sure you know that. One of the girls raised her hand and says, you know, almost every hospital I've ever been in that has visiting animals has dogs. She said she certified her cat for a children's hospital. First of all, if you're going to bring in an animal, there's some people that like big dogs and some like small dogs. So you have to have different kinds of dogs. There's even a place, a nursing home or a hospital, where they brought in a llama because with the long neck, it can reach down to where somebody is bedridden. But there are people that are not dog people, they're cat people. My father, may he rest in peace, was one of them. When he was in the hospital once, he kept asking about Pincus. That wasn't the dog's original name, or the cat's original name, but my father renamed it Pincus. I know, and I'm sure insurance companies would, and Medicare would confirm it, if we had more cats, dogs, and so forth, that people would be discharged from hospitals a day earlier or whatever, and save $1 trillion. So that's what I knew about the animal-assisted therapy. And you can see, by the way, in the poem, I have nerd faces, the fat, the short, the variety of it. The youngest mitzvah hero I dealt with, it was a 7-year-old in the Washington area. And the oldest was the chicken lady. Billy, you'd met the chicken lady, yes? She died just short of her 100th birthday. Yes, definitely the oldest. The Rabbanit died at 92 and a half. Saw the 5th generation, not just great-grandchildren, but one generation below that. And the youngest was a 7-year-old kid who somehow heard about foster kids who, when they slept from one house to another, throw all of their belongings in a garbage bag, big garbage bag. She said, got to do something about it. And she started asking for duffel bags and suitcases. She got tons of them. A couple of years into the project, a foundation gave her $15,000. The kid. And the other one was Rabbi Steele introduced me. She used to be in, and not Wichita, in Topeka, Kansas. And I met this kid who, when she had heard about the tornadoes that hit Oklahoma City, she set up a lemonade stand. Am I blanking? Emily? Emma, yeah. And she set up a lemonade stand. A lot of people do lemonade stands for mitzvahs. And I joked with the people that any car that would dare to pass by without buying the mitzvah lemonade, she would jump out and stop it. Well, that wasn't true. But a congregant told me she actually went down the street to the church to explain what she was doing. So they would come and buy the lemonade so she'd have more money to help pay for the kind of repairs they needed after the tornado. The kid. Now, last thing on this. I knew nothing about this stuff as a kid. I only started that trip when I went to Israel. I was 30. When I was 18, USY, we had a fundraising program. We raised $50,000 back then in the early 60s. It was money, that's all. We knew nothing. I knew nothing of this kind of stuff. It was not, I mean, I knew my mother was president of Hadassah and the sisterhood and all these other kinds of things and volunteer stuff. But certainly that the idea that a high school kid can't graduate without a certain number of hours, unheard of. The only thing that would get kids out of my high school was they wanted to get rid of them. Some of the kids that were a little problematic, shall we say. I mean, it's all because I ran into Mary Mendelow and the other kind of people. Now, people try to pin on me that obviously I learned it from my mother and father. Well, my mother was a bit of a saintly person, and my father was known as a great Baal Tzedakah, a very generous in tzedakah. And I wrote a thing, my mother's 3 great mitzvah heroes, all women, 2 Jews and 1 non-Jew. I asked the audience, who do you think they were? And it's Eleanor Roosevelt, Henrietta Zold, and Golda Meir. Well, when you grow up the next generation down, and those are the kind of people my mother admired and looked to, all you have to do is find people that are older than me, women, in the audience and say, what was Eleanor Roosevelt's newspaper column? And they all pipe up, My Day. And people read it every single day. I'm sorry I didn't flash up the picture of, I have my mother and a bunch of reporters when she was a young reporter in New Jersey who had just interviewed Eleanor Roosevelt. And there's Eleanor, tall and thin. And the first one to her right is dear old Ema. But that's not where it clicked. It didn't occur. And the reason I wrote about the doctors on TV is my father didn't project it on me, but I thought the only life-saving people were doctors. I was raised surrounded by doctors. I remember a neurosurgeon. I remember an obstetrician particularly. My father and 2 other guys used to go out into the sticks around Washington to deliver babies. My father was a GP. One of them was an obstetrician. The third one was an eyes, ears, nose, and throat man. And they went to far distances where there was no civilization, like Herndon, which is now the high-tech area of the Washington area. So that's what I thought. I mean, when the neurosurgeon tells me in his day, 50% of the people that come out from his knife hope to come out as well as they did when they went in. Oh, I also remember an alcoholic brain surgeon, I think. I'm trying to remember, but they were all over the place. And so that's what I thought. And I admired them. It was called the noble profession. But to get from there to the great Tzedakah photograph in the sky, the transition started at age 3. And that's why I tell the US Wires at age 17, 18, you are years ahead of me. And particularly if they started with their Bar Bat Mitzvah project, more than a decade ahead.
Danny, we're coming up on the hour now.
Oh,
And I wanted to make sure people had an opportunity to ask you questions and for you to
Yeah.
give us any final thoughts before we run out of time.
okay.
When you can unmute your microphones as needed, if you have a question for Danny, please feel free.
By the way, Bill, I didn't want to imply that after you did this stuff for Avshalom, you stopped doing mitzvahs. How do you like that? Nobody got any questions? Barbara, come on. Oh, you know the answers already. Huh.
Well, Danny, I'll ask one then if nobody else has one. And I mean, I guess my final question would be, how do we continue to be mitzvah doers in this difficult time? How do we keep doing these good works when you know, it's so difficult to be proximate to each other? We talk about in your text how important it is to have the connectivity to one another when the problems seem so huge. And Ellen, you may have a better question than I do, so go ahead, Ellen. Don't answer mine, Danny. Answer Ellen and Stuart.
No, yours. I got to jot down a note or two.
Go ahead, Ellen.
You talked about the therapeutic writing program. What are some of the ramifications? Has that been do they do it in not only in Israel, but what are some of the things that has happened out of that program?
Well, first of all, there's it used to be called NARHA. I don't know, North American Writing, NARHA of America, something. I once put the wrong thing in and it came to the National Rifle Association. The best way you can see it is two things. On a video that we did for her, there are twins born with cerebral palsy who have been riding there for years. And you see them walking in their own particular way when it's over. And they're walking to go home. They walk to the car where I assume they had a driver. Not so. So one of them gets in the car and at the driver's side and one on the other. The other thing is Anita, first of all, Anita is one of the world's experts on brain trauma. She wrote a book about it. She's been to the Far East and other places lecturing on it. Unfortunately, because of the wars in Israel, there are plenty of soldiers with the brain trauma. But her latest, and it'll be a new book, is on PTSD for soldiers. She's actually come to Walter Reed and worked with them. And she does seminars, and every single certified therapeutic writing in Israel are her students. The ones that aren't certified, I don't know. But whether you pick blind people, whether you people with, I'll give you one more example. Sorry. We had a bat mitzvah kid who actually called her on the phone. There was one particular soldier, and I'm sorry, I don't remember his name, who was dragged half dead off of the battlefield. And this bat mitzvah kid called Anita and say, I'm going to pay for a year of lessons for this soldier, who is, by the way, there are so many of these people that have progressed. Oh, God, she tells the kid. One PTSD soldier comes back to the Israel National, to the center, and he wants to thank them. And he goes to the horse, and he thanks the horse. That's one. Another one, she said, and she describes soldiers that lie in bed for 6 months. And in many cases, the wife doesn't divorce. They stick together, but they're zombies. She said one of them was the summer we were with her. He was on vacation with his wife in Italy. So some of the stuff, the Agenesis of the Corpus Callosum. How's that for something to throw around? Doctor, you know what that is. What am I going to talk about? There's connecting stuff between the right brain and the left brain. And if you have the agenesis of it, you don't have it. And not only does it cause things like you don't know your right from your left, but some very serious stuff. Anita's she's leading a kid who's like 3, 4, 5 years old, who hasn't talked at all. They don't talk. I mean, and the other things, what can be reconstructed, we don't know. She's walking alongside the horse, and they're going along, and the kid points at a school and says, Ani Bagan, the first word she's ever spoken. So as with Avshalom, sometimes it's a miraculous sudden thing, sometimes it takes years. So they discover, I got to give you one more. 10 years ago, she said, this stuff can be beneficial to certain people at certain stages of multiple sclerosis. That's enough. So a U.S. wire goes back, tells his aunt, she does it. And even though people have good times and bad times with MS, this woman felt for 6 months she didn't use a wheelchair, that was just attributed to the riding. Then, no more than 2 summers ago, she says, therapeutic riding will be of benefit with people with eating disorders. Now, she's telling this to a bunch of teenagers. And, she mentioned a few of the details why, but she could give a whole lecture on it. Absolutely. So that's part of it. That Avshalom, with his cats and dogs, is now birds and rabbits. And, for us, it's like when I'm brought to a weekend and they say I'm a scholar in residence, I know what a scholar is. When I think of who my scholarly Bible professors were, I'm not a scholar. I'm not being falsely, whatever. But with the Mitzvah Heroes, they are very much advanced, but not to make us feel small, but just welcoming us to join them in their insights. So those are the things that are new. Shmuel Munk, with Yoram Mordechai, founded Beit Cham for people with mental illness. They have expanded into victims of domestic violence and other kinds of things. There's no end to what they're going to come up with. Okay, Rabbi.
Yes, Danny. Maybe a final thought. And Anne, you have a quick comment too? Go ahead, Anne.
Yeah, I do. I have a question and a comment actually about the title of the book, Radiance.
Yes.
When I first met the Mitzvah Heroes, which was in an educator's tour with you, Danny, I was really struck by the radiance of the people that we had spent so much time with. And I wasn't sure how I was going to exist without feeling that radiance. But I'm curious, and I know Ziv, of course, was the name of your tzedakah fund. And I'm just curious how long it took you to find Ziv as a name for your fund.
Well, first of all, it's two-edged, means two things. Ziv is the radiance of the Mitzvah Heroes, and Ziv of the mitzvah itself. Okay. How long it took me to come up with that? The title of the book, it was bandied about early on until finally it struck us that that fits the most.
Absolutely.
And we had to put a kind of a subtitle under it, which JPS came up with, so that people wouldn't think it was a book on Kabbalah. I'll give you a better example. My first book, Soul Stoned, printed, I think, by Gutenberg, actually. Just joking. I'm sitting at a counter having lunch with my friend, Alan Sugarman. I used to write a poem, send it up to him. He would come up with a collage because we didn't know you couldn't do that. Next day, I'd do the same thing. It eventually became Soulstone. And we're sitting there cocking around with titles, who knows what. And he went to yeshiva, and I knew the phrase also. It was from Rav Kook. There's souls that are stones and stones that are souls. And he put together, because obviously from the 60s, the word stoned. And there it was. Other titles, I generally came up with, like, and God braided Eve's hair from the Talmud. But Ziv, I could not tell you. For the title of the book, we probably for a week, between my friend Jan and JPS and Neil and myself, until we came across a final decision on Radiance. But how it first came up in my work, there was one time we brought a bunch of teachers, and I remember one teacher was sitting right next to the Rabbanit on her couch. And she said she felt a certain aura about her. I'm not a mystic. I don't believe that. I do believe she had a direct connection with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. How do I know? Because I said, Rabbanit, where are you going to get the money to do this and that? And she keeps saying, Hashem Yazor, God will help. And I want to look at this little Yemenite lady and I want to say, it don't work that way. But she knew better. So as far as the title of the book, that's how long. But if I were to go way, Ziv Tzedakah Fund was founded in 1981. I knew that once I was going to title that, when I founded the Canadian fund also was going to be the same. It seemed like the most appropriate. Also, it was easy to spell.
Thank you, Danny.
Great question, Ann, and great to see you.
Anyone else? I want to be conscious of people's time.
It's getting dark down here.
Danny, I just want to thank you. It has been such a joy. And as you've been talking, I've been thinking of all the things that you have taught me over the years that I honestly didn't remember I had learned from you until I started to hear from you again about the consciousness of the person, that being aware of the people whose job it is to bring back the shopping carts. And to not go, and I remember you teaching, maybe I got it wrong and I've been doing it wrong all the time, but I remember you teaching me a while ago not to bring the shopping carts back, because that's somebody's job. And if I do that, then they're going to be out of a job. And I don't know if you remember that. I hope I got that right. Otherwise, I've been screwing it up for 30 plus years.
Go ahead. I once said, there's this great, mitzvahs are like potato chips. You can't just do one. And I wrote to Jack Reamer and I said, Jack, thank you, thank you. He says, it's not mine, but if you want to say it's mine,
I unmute it.
But Danny, thank
Danny, can you hear me? Can
Yes,
somebody
go
hear?
ahead, Anita. Go ahead, Anita.
Oh, it's Anita.
Yeah, I just want to tell you, I've sent you a picture. I've sent you a video of you riding a horse on the beach
When did you send this?
just 2 minutes ago.
Oh, okay. Well, after we're through with this,
I thought when you said you'd had contact with dogs and cats and all this stuff, I thought, well, you better see that you actually rode a horse on the beach
oh yes.
in Israel.
No, but you don't remember the first time I really had the contact with the horse. You told me that for some people you draped them sideways over a horse
That's right. Yeah.
to loosen them up. And so I said, okay, I want to see what it's like. You bring out a horse at least twice the size of a Clydesdale, practically needed a mirror, a ladder to climb up on. And even though I had people on both sides to make sure I wouldn't fall apart, I was terrified.
Right.
And then eventually I
Yeah.
learned how to ride a little bit. Also, guys, when we're talking Mitzvah Heroes, Anita's the one that told me about the woman who became famous for all of therapeutic horseback riding in the world. She was from Denmark. Her name was
Liz Hartle.
Liz Hartle.
Yeah, she had polio.
Yes, and
And yeah, she rode in the
52 and 56 Olympics.
53, yeah, the Olympics.
Yes, and she won
And
2 silver. I held the silver medal in my hands.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
went
you
to meet
spoke to her, didn't you?
Well,
Didn't
I met her.
Yeah, you met her. Yeah.
And,
Marvelous.
you know, the myth was that when they interviewed her, everybody wanted to know, why was it so hard for you to get up on it? You needed help on the horse. That's because of the polio. The newspapers, you know, the myth was, the newspapers are going to pick it up and make her like the whole world's going to do therapeutic horseback riding. So I'm at her place, at her home, and there's a pile of newspapers from all over the world telling the story.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's when you meet the world famous one.
She convinced the most disabled people that they could do it. And, you know, when they saw her getting it back into a wheelchair, they said, well, if she can do it, we can do it. I just wanted, I don't want to talk, but I just want to bring to your notice that perhaps you don't know this, that they're now, well, it's actually since 2014 in the United States, but many soldiers are suffering now from moral injury. It's a moral PTSD. They're really suffering from, they call it moral injury. And if you think about a young person going into the army and he's been brought up in a very nice way and everything, and he then is asked to do pretty horrible things by his commanding officer, who he must obey because he's in the army. And this isn't just the Israeli army, this is in the American army and all armies now. And a person really suffers inside. They finish their time in the army, but later on, it comes back to them what they have done and why they feel so guilty that they never stopped doing whatever they were doing. And I can say to you as a Jewish audience, there's been situations in Israel where young officers who have been brought up to be the very tip-top special unit people because they've been short-staffed or something, were asked to guard a group of rioters on the West Bank. And in this situation, when I say rioters, they might be the ripe old age of about 10 years old. And they are bundled together in a lorry. They're brought to a place, they're dumped off, they're all handcuffed and everything, and they're in a terrible condition. Young soldiers who feel that their role in the army must be, you know, if I'm going out to blow up something, it's not thinking about guarding kids or some, you know, and treating them badly. And so these people are really suffering. And today there are thousands of young people in this situation here and in the States. And if you ever hear about it, it's called moral injury.
Anita, thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
It's worth you know, looking into it. I mean, if you're going to shoot from, you know, you're sitting in the desert down in Arizona or something, and you're killing a dot on a screen, you know, this is also traumatic.
Friends, I'm going to have to bring our program to a close. I have another appointment coming very soon, and I need a few minutes between them. Danny, the point that I was trying to make at the very end there, when I was talking about the shopping carts, was not, or the buggies as we call them here in Vancouver, was not so much about that, but that you have taught me, and I think all of us, as I tell my students when I teach Torah, I say, let's see the world through Parshat HaShavua glasses. Let's see the world through the Torah portion of the week. And you have taught us through your writing and your teaching and your example to see the world through tzedakah glasses, to see the world through mitzvah glasses. And I just thank you as much as your book and its title of Radiance to bring the light. It's also taught us to see those points of light. So Danny, thank you for that and for your lifetime of work. I want to thank you all for joining us today, and please stay safe, please stay home, and hopefully we'll all gather together again, not virtually, but in person sometime soon. Thank you
now
very much.
I'm emotionally exhausted now. I'm going to have to turn on the TV for the next few hours. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you,
Danny.
Rabbi
Thank
and
you,
Danny.
Anita. Wow.
Thank
Wow.
you.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. Lovely to see you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. It's a huge thunderstorm.